Hello everyone, I'm Tommy. Thank you for always watching the videos. Well, this time I'd like to introduce a single point of advice that therapists and trainers can use in treatment. Today's theme is how to implement the idea of coupling motion into treatment. Let's get started right away. Have you ever heard the term coupling motion? Coupling motion refers to a movement that is emphasized when performing an action. Two movements happening at the same time are called coupling motions in the movement of a couple. For example, when studying anatomy, there are instances where the movement of the human body is described in terms of a plane. For instance, the movement of lateral flexion and the movement of flexion are two-dimensional. They're known as planar movements. However, the real movement of the body always moves in a three-dimensional structure. Realistically, it's quite difficult to imagine taking a movement, especially a movement around the trunk and the spine, and moving it only in a two-dimensional plane. Especially when it comes to the movement around the body and the spine, it involves the balancing of the entire body. In one movement, there are always multiple movements inherently embedded. Particularly, the representative coupling motion is the movement of lateral flexion and rotation. For example, when you tilt your body to the side, a rotational motion happens in the spine. The skeletal structure containing two or more movements during one movement is called a coupling motion. I want to show you how to apply this concept of coupling movement in treatment today. I'm thinking of demonstrating it today. First, I'd like to go over the actual movement in detail. I'd like to start by looking at neck movement. Now, let's look at the skeletal structure. Let's depict a scene where this skeleton bends sideways to the right. When you tilt your head sideways, this rightward bending movement. In a traditional understanding, it would be considered a movement of folding sideways plane. However, as you can see when we look at skeletal movement, the structure of the neck is such that vertebrae are stacked on each other. If you try to bend much sideways in the plane, you bump into them, don't you? It's this right line over here. If you try to tilt your face sideways, this part of the right side of the vertebrae would inevitably, all parts of the right side of the vertebrae are in contact and brakes are applied somewhere. However, in actual movements, it doesn't stop here. When you tilt your head sideways, there is slightly more range of motion. This movement, when the head tilts to the right, essentially, the lower part of the neck rotates in the direction of movement. To illustrate, while right side bending, the lower part of the neck, the line of movement is towards the right side. Look at this thumb, it's rotating to the right. On the other hand, the upper part of the cervical spine is going to cause a line in the opposite direction. The lower part of the cervical spine is a kinetic line, and the upper part of the cervical spine is causing a speed line. Can you see this movement now? When you go to the right side flexion, all the bones in the neck fall to the right in one place, but the lower part of the cervical spine is the line in the direction of speed. The lower part of the cervical spine goes in the direction of speed. The upper part of the cervical spine is causing a line in the opposite direction. This movement occurs in a very natural way in the skeletal structure. It's not a two-dimensional movement, it's a set of line movements. The lower part of the neck is a moving line, and the upper part of the neck is a speed line. The entire neck is able to get lateral flexion. Next, I would like to look at the movement of the spine. The coupling motion is going to happen, so please take a look at it. Now you're going to lean your body in the right direction. It's the so-called lateral flexion of the trunk, and it's going to cause a lateral flexion motion to the right. Please look closely at this lumbar spine that is now in a straight line. What happens when you go to the right of the body? This is the movement. The body itself has taken the movement of bending to the right on the plane, but the lumbar spine is running to the left. Do you see the part of the lumbar spine running to the left? The pelvis's position is a fixed structure, so the upper part of the torso, the chest spine and neck spine go in the right direction. The lumbar spine balances itself while using the left line and performing a coordinated movement of the upper body. This is very interesting. The neck spine and chest spine flex laterally, so there isn't much rotational movement. But the lumbar spine section does a rotational movement in the opposite direction, to the left. This rotational movement of the lumbar spine curves the upper body to the right. In terms of body usage, this appears as a lateral bend to the right, but in terms of lumbar movement, it is a rotational movement to the opposite side, the left. This is a necessary way of thinking to balance. Actually, when you look at it, you may realize it's not such a difficult concept. If the entire lumbar spine moved to the right, the range of motion would be limited unless you changed the position of the pelvis. and there would be a limitation on the range of lateral flexion towards the right. Because the right side is limited, the range of motion of the lateral flexion to the right is reduced, so the lateral bending movement is performed by the upper part of the upper body, and the lumbar spine performs rotational movements in opposite directions to maintain the overall balance. I want to try it once more. There will be a form where the spine is straight. At this time, of course, the cervical, thoracic, and lumbar spine all align in a straight line. From here, we then proceed to perform a planar lateral flexion movement. The more considerable the movement of lateral flexion towards the right, the more the cervical and thoracic parts laterally flex. This is a planar lateral flexion movement. The lumbar region supports the angle of the upper body by rotating in the opposite direction. This rotational movement allows the pelvic position to remain stable. This becomes what we call a coupling motion. It can be expressed as the rotational movement accompanying the overall spinal lateral flexion. I believe there's no need to overthink how to apply this in treatment. I am currently taking a lateral flexion motion in the right direction. This means that there is a lateral flexion in the right side of the upper half of the upper body. This part exhibits a very constricting movement. On the other hand, the left side tends to loosen and open up. So, what about the lower part of the upper body, the lumbar region? It demonstrates a left curve. You can see that the right side is opening up, the right side opens, and the left side constricts. What I'm trying to say is that the occurrence of a coupling motion, the sensation of fatigue accumulates diagonally because the body's overall balance is being maintained. When taking a right lateral bend, the upper right and lower left parts become constricted. On the other hand, the upper left and lower right parts tend to have an open and loose structure. Therefore, in daily life, if the right lateral flexion is strong, there is a tendency for the area around the right shoulder blade and the neck to stiffen up. Such individuals will inevitably experience the left hip area becoming constricted. This is because the line obstructs the left part of the lumbar spine, so when taking care of it, approach diagonally. This is also applicable to the upper and lower parts of the cervical spine. There are parts that twist towards the brain and the body. Fatigue builds up diagonally as a result. In order to balance the whole, a diagonal approach is very important. I think it would be good if you could learn this from the viewpoint of coupling motion. This area has many complex ways of thinking. If you delve into your specialty, you'll find various exceptions. However, as a general knowledge base for therapists and trainers, I think it's good to start with this content. Coupling motion is when one action is performed, two movements combine. The purpose of the coupling motion is to achieve balance. Hence, there is a thought process that fatigue is occurring on the diagonal line. This can be used as a reference for your approach. More specific details are summarized in the summary section. If you're interested, please check it out. That's it for today's video. Looking forward to next time. Thank you very much, as always.